Hey guys, we're going to go over a passage in Hebrews 10 today, and I'm going to kind of explain how it ties into some things I'm going to talk about. In Hebrews 10, starting in verse 23, it says, "Let us hold the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another so much the more as ye see the day approaching." And what the author of Hebrews here is talking about is talking about us holding fast in our faith and talking about us continuing to build up one another. And as one of our brothers uh, begins to falter or begins to go through periods of doubt or weakness, that we're to be there for one another and to encourage one another to continue on with the race. And I think about that in the context of this channel, because that's really the purpose of this channel. Is um, I want to be able to encourage other Christians out there to continue on in their walk, um, to continue pressing on and pressing in closer to Christ. Um, and as well, a lot of times your all's comments do the same for me. They serve as encouragement for me that 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 process is actually working and that people are actually getting something out of it. So I continue on. But I think about things in terms of current events. And when I first became a Christian, I really dove in deep to the topic of creation. There was questions that I had, and had really just kind of accepted blindly, that I really did not delve into deeply, because quite frankly I didn't want to know the answers. I didn't really realize that there was as much evidence for um, intelligent design and for the Christian uh, description of creation as there was. So I really started to dive in deep, and set aside that fear, and then I just let the chips fall where they may. And I really did come to the conclusion that there's actually a ton of scientific evidence to support the biblical narrative, as opposed to this secular narrative talking about evolution, things like that. Uh, but one of the things that I constantly ran into, the argument that was always made by secularists, or evolutionists in particular, was that these just the mountain of scientists, the just the sheer number of scientists who would basically regurgitate this evolutionary idea, and they would say things like, "Well, there's no published journals for creationists," and so on and so forth, and they would constantly regurgitate that. And I heard the argument made by creationists that the reason for that is not because there's not evidence, or not because creationists are not writing these things, but because simply these uh, these science journals would not publish anything if it gave a different narrative other than evolution. And on the face of it, I'm a very skeptical individual. So on the face of it, I'm thinking, well, that sounds a little conspiratorial. I mean, it sounds, I wasn't sure how accurate that was. But the fact of the matter is that uh, there was doctors and PhD professors and engineers and scientists of all kind, uh, who were writing things on creation, but they would only be on in their journals. It wouldn't be in uh, the New England Journal of Medicine, or something like this. It wouldn't be in a secularly published journal. So I really, struggled with this a little bit. But then the other day, Bill Nye, the guy who debated um, Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis, the two of them debated on creation versus evolution. And a lot of people came out and they're like, "Oh, Bill Nye won the debate." And I really haven't watched the debate. I've only seen a couple highlights. But a debate is not something that is to be won. A debate is something where two educated individuals come together and they put together their mountain of evidence, uh, and both are willing to accept, if the case can be made, to accept the evidence as it comes. And Bill Nye went in there clearly, with a bias and was unwilling, and probably to a certain degree Ken Ham as well. Uh, but then the other day, Bill Nye came out and started talking about how gender is something that is, what did he? I think the term he used, it's a spectrum. That it's no longer male and female, and this is in contradiction to past things that he has said in some of his shows, where he talks about gender is determined by chromosomes. Um, and I really began to kind of sit and think about that, because here it is, this current political narrative is that gender is fluid, and that, you get to pick the gender and things like this. Um, and here it is, this scientist is he is absolutely 100% politicizing his science. And that really called into question, and in my opinion, it actually serves as a little bit of encouragement, because here it is, this well-known scientist, the guy who supposedly beat Ken Ham in this debate, and there's no science behind anything that Bill Nye the Science Guy is saying. It is just pure politics and social engineering, that this guy is going forth and saying that gender is fluid, that gender is a spectrum, and things like this. And it really kind of makes you question everything that he said. It makes you question his evolutionary theories. Um, the fact of the matter is the state, in general, the state has a particular bias towards evolution, because if the state is the origin of your freedoms, then they have the ability to take it away. Versus, according to our Constitution, we have certain rights, inalienable rights. That means rights that cannot be taken away. We have certain inalienable rights that are given to us by God, and that the state's job is to protect those. Um, but if it's God that gives the rights, then then they can't take it away. So I began to kind of think about this, and I don't want to get too political on this channel, but um, it was actually a blessing of sorts that Ken Ham, or that, excuse me, that Bill Nye came out with this whole gender fluidity, gender spectrum thing, and stuff like that, because in doing so, he has essentially shown his hand. He has shown that he can be bought, that he can be corrupted, that he can kind of slant his scientific background and training towards a political narrative if the situation calls for it. And in doing so, he completely invalidates himself as a scientist, and, in my opinion, invalidates everything that he has said in the past. So I wanted to maybe point that out, and hopefully some other people who are maybe struggling with the creation evolution debate and some of the arguments that are made. I would encourage you to check out, Dr. Kent Hovind, Answers in Genesis. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Dr. John Lennox from Oxford. Uh, there's extremely well-educated individuals who actually teach on this subject, that don't buy into the whole evolutionary theory, and they have no incentive to do so. There's nothing offered to them to actually preach this creation narrative, um, because most of them do it to their own detriment. So wanted to share that with you guys, and hopefully you guys kind of sit and think about that and ponder that for a little bit. All right, God bless.